So in this tutorial, we're going to create a widget which is loosely based on the widget that is provided by the Tawk.to website. And this isn't necessarily saying that this is going to be a replacement for it, but it's just to show you how you would go about creating this kind of widget and then putting it onto any particular site that you might be working on, or providing it as a service for other developers to use as well. So I think this suggestion originally came from one of our community members, Paul. So thanks very much for the suggestion, Paul, and I hope you enjoy creating your own Tawk.to widget.
So here's a quick overview of what we're going to be building. As you can see, we've got a little widget that we've added onto the bottom of the screen here. And if we actually click on that, you can see it pops up with a contact form for us to fill in. Now, the Tawk.to website actually has like an online chat that you can register for, but we're just actually going to be using a simple contact form. And if we fill this in with some details and some text for the message, if we hit submit, you can see that it says that someone will be in touch with us, but that doesn't actually do anything. It won't actually send any data anywhere at this point. But what it does do is actually grab the form information that we've filled out and put it into an object, so that we've actually got that ready to send to some kind of endpoint or API or system that will process that data and actually send an email or whatever system it's going to go into. Okay, so that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Obviously, if we close the widget, the contact form disappears. And what this actually is being added with is just pure vanilla JavaScript. So we're going to inject this into a page. So the idea being that you can kind of create this kind of widget and just drop it into any website that you're currently working on. So all of the styles and all of the functionality and all of the HTML is actually loaded via JavaScript. So you don't even need any placeholder HTML to actually enable this widget on a page. So that's a quick overview. Let's get started with writing some code. So over in Visual Studio Code, I've actually just got a simple project set up. I've installed a few dependencies. I've just got parcel for our build process. And I'm also, to serve, I'm just copying these assets that I've already added in. So there's some SVGs for the various different icons. So what we'll do is just get that running now, just to show you that we've got an empty project. So we can run that with npm run serve, and that will basically just serve the index page. And as you can see at the moment, there's nothing in there. So wait for that to load. And then if we just go to this URL in our browser, you can see we've got an empty page ready for us to start our project. So the first thing I'm going to do is create an app.js file, and this will be the entry point for our application. So this would be what you would actually insert into an existing project. So this will be where we'll just initialize our code. So let's just put a link to that in the index page here. So we'll use a simple script tag and just close that off there. And we want to put the source equal to app.js. And just to test that's running or set up correctly, we'll just say app is loaded and save that. Go back over to the browser, have a look in our dev tools. And if we refresh the page, we can see that app is loaded. So we know that the app.js file is linked to this HTML page. So as I say, this would be what the code that is already running on your website. We're actually going to create a separate file for our widget so that it can be loaded into various different places. So let's do that now. Let's just create another file, and I'm just going to call it Tawk.js. And this will be the file that will have all of the code for the widget, and we'll just initialize it in the app.js file. So I'm actually going to export this as a class, and I'll call it Tawk. And let's just set up a basic constructor just to see that it's working. So console.log Tawk widget constructed, for example. And then over in our app.js file, let's actually just create a new instance of that Tawk class. So we'll just say a new const of Tawk is equal to a new Tawk class, and that will call the constructor for us. And let's just import that up at the top of the file here. So we'll use the import statement. And it's a named export of the class Tawk, so we'll use the curly braces there. And the file name is just Tawk. So if we save that, what we're actually doing here is importing the Tawk class from the Tawk file that we just created here a moment ago. And then we're just creating a new instance of it, which we'll call the constructor. So we should see the two console.log messages appearing in the browser now. So let's head back over there and have a look. And as you can see, we've got app is loaded and the Tawk widget is constructed. Excellent. So let's go back over and start doing something a bit more meaningful in our class here. So what we're going to do in the constructor, we're actually going to set a position of where the widget will display on the page. So we'll give the developer who's using this the option to put it either in the bottom right, the bottom left, or potentially even in the top left or top right as well. So we can get rid of this for now. And in our constructor, this is where we're going to pass in the options for the actual Tawk class. So I'm going to pass in an object, and it has a property of position. And I'm going to default it to the bottom right, which is where we saw it appearing at the initial part of this video. And I'm going to set a member property on the class of this.position. And then I'm going to call a function, which I haven't created yet, called this.getPosition. And I'll pass in that position property, if I can spell it properly, which is basically the variable that we're destructuring from the constructor options that are passed in. So let's fill out the getPosition function that we just created. So it's going to take one argument of position. And what we're going to do is actually create two variables based on the string that's passed in. So this position is just going to be a string, which is either bottom right, bottom left, etc. So we'll split it into two variables, and we'll do that by using an array destructuring assignment. And we'll say the vertical position and the horizontal position is equal to the position, which again is the string that we've passed in, and we'll split that by a dash or a minus sign. So what will happen here is if we pass in bottom right into this variable here, the vertical variable will receive the text bottom, and horizontal will receive the text of right. And based off of those values, what we can do is return a new object, which we're going to be assigning to the position member. And we're going to set the vertical. We're going to use a computed property, which is a nice ES6 feature that we can use here. And we're just going to push it in 30 pixels from whatever value has been put into vertical. And the same for horizontal as well. We'll just push that in 30 pixels. So let's just break this down. So if we pass in bottom right, what will this actual get position return? So position, the member variable, will be equal to an object that will have a property of bottom, which will be 30 pixels. And also a property of right, which will also be 30 pixels. So I'm going to use this position object that's set up on the class in just a moment to actually position the elements that we're creating on the page. Okay, so let's carry on. We're going to set another member property on the class, which is this.open. So this is just denoting whether the actual widget is open or closed. So we'll know to actually show the contact form if the widget is actually open. And then I'm just going to reference another function, which again we haven't created yet, called initialize. And this will be the function that we're going to use to actually create all of the elements on the page. So let's make a start on doing that now. So we've actually got something we can see on our page. So initialize is the function that we're going to be calling. And this is going to be the main part of our class, and it's going to be a fair amount of work to create all of the different elements. So let's make a start. So first of all, we're going to have a container element, and this will just be a div element. So let's create a div here. And the first thing I'm going to do with the container is just set its style property, or rather its position of its style property, equal to fixed. So no matter where you are on the page, if you've got a longer page than the actual screen width, then it will always be in the bottom right or bottom left of the screen. And then the next thing we're going to do is actually use the position property that we've just created on the object to actually make sure that it's appearing in the right place. So from the position property, I'm going to access each of its keys. So in this example, it will be bottom and then right. And then I'm going to use these to actually set some style for each of the keys that we've got. So for each of those, and just grab the reference to the key, I'm going to say the container.style and whatever key it is, so whether it's bottom or right, and we'll just set the value of that to the position and the key, which in our example is going to be 30 pixels for both. And whilst we're here, I'm just going to append the container to the actual body of the document that we're working with. So this will just set up a containing div element that will be fixed to the page, which will either be in the bottom left or bottom right, or wherever the developer who's using this widget is specified. And then we've just added it onto the document body. So let's actually go over to the browser. We're not actually going to see. So there is actually an error here. So it's saying we can't read the property of position of undefined on line 2. So scroll up, so that's in the constructor. Okay, so I'm destructuring an object here, but I'm not actually passing one in the app.js. So let's just pass in an empty object as the default value, and that should go away. That error's gone now. So let's just have a look at the elements that we've got on the page. So this element here is our container element. You can see this wasn't in the actual original HTML file, so this has been added via JavaScript, and the bottom property has been set, but the right property has not been set for some reason. So let's have a look at that. So it looks okay for me. So let's just have a look in the actual code itself. Let's see what gets returned from get position here. So let's just set a breakpoint in our debugger. So what's the value of this dot position? Yeah, so it's bottom and right is set correctly. So let's just go through object.keys and put a breakpoint in this part here. And let's play the debugger. So the first key that we've got is going to be the value of bottom, which is correct. Let's go to the next breakpoint. And it seems to have finished before doing the other element there. So let's run that again and just check what objects.keys is equal to here. It seems like it probably did run again, but we've got a comma here in the right pixel value. So that's probably what's causing the problem there. So we've saved that. Let's just clear our breakpoints and reload the page. And let's have a look at that element again. So now we've got the position of right as well. So that div, if you look over on the right hand side of the page, you can see the Chrome's placeholder is just denoting where that element is, but because it's got no height and width, we can't really see much of it. So there's not much to see at the moment, but you can see that that element is being created and it's in the right place as well. Okay, so let's go back and finish off some more of our initialize function here. So we've got some more work to do in creating some more elements. So the first thing I'm going to do is create another element, and I'm going to put this in a variable called button container. So create an element, and that'll just be another div as well. And we're going to start adding some classes to these as well. So button container dot class list with a capital L dot add. And I'll just give it a class of button container. So we're going to create all our styles in a separate function in just a moment. We're not going to make any inline styles here. We're actually just going to inject a whole style sheet in another function, and you'll see how that works in a minute. But let's carry on creating some of these elements. So we're going to have a chat icon. So document.create element. And this time it's going to be an image element. So this is a container for holding one of the SVGs that we've got. So chat icon.source is equal to assets chat.svg. So I should have mentioned this earlier, but you can see here in our file browser that we've got several icons available for us to use. I don't think I ended up using the back one in the end, so that one's probably a bit redundant. But chat and cross are the ones that we're going to be using to display on the widget themselves. So on the chat icon, I'm going to also set a class list, and I'm going to add a class onto that of icon. So we can use the same class for both of the two icons that we're going to be using. And we're going to set a member property on the class called this.chatIcon is equal to this chat icon variable that we've just created. Now the reason we're doing this is because we're going to swap out the icons depending on whether the widget is opened or closed. So having a member property on the class just allows us to keep a reference of which one is actually assigned at the moment, so then we can swap them when the user actually clicks on the widget button. So we need to do the same thing again, but we're going to do it for a close icon. So let's create a new element, and it's going to be an image again. And we'll set the source of that image equal to assets dot it was cross.svg. It's the one we've got. And for that close icon again, I'm going to set some classes on it. So the first one is going to be icon, and because when the widget loads initially, it's actually going to be showing the chat icon to start off with. The closed one is actually going to be hidden, so I'm going to create another class in a moment called hidden. So we'll apply that to that particular icon at the moment. So this dot close icon, again I'm setting a new member variable here so we can keep a reference of the close icon and just assign it that close icon variable that we've just created. Okay, so we've got some elements set up for our icons on the widget. We still need to have another containing element for the kind of pop-up, the message contact form that we've got. So I'm going to create on the class a new member variable called message container. And we need it on the class again because we're going to be referencing it elsewhere in the class, not just in this function. So we'll create another element of div, and then this dot message container dot class list and dot add, And I'm going to put a hidden class on there, and also a class of message container, which will allow us to style it in just a moment. And we're going to set up another function here in a moment to create all of the content for the message container. So let's just put that there for the minute. But we'll come back to that in a second. But what we need to do is start pulling all of this together. So we created that button container element to contain the icons that we've got. So I'm going to append the first chat icon onto that first of all. So if the user's got the widget closed, and the second one is button container, append child, and this .close icon, because they're going to be in the same place. We're just going to be swapping out which one's actually visible at any one time. And then finally, on the overall container that we created initially, we're going to append the child, and it will be this .message container, and also the button container as well. So we can see now we've got a containing element for our message container, so that's the contact form, and we've also got this button container as well. We do actually have the images loading here, but they're actually wide, so you can't see them on the page there, but it is there, trust me. And the other one seems to not be there, so let's just check we've got the right path in for that. So the cross is there, the chat one appears not to be. Let's just check our paths, etc. Whoops, yeah, I can see what the problem is here. So I've actually got the chat icon up here and then the close icon variable here, but I referenced the chat icon again there. So that should be close icon. So if you save that, go back and have a look. So yeah, you can see this is the close icon appearing and this is the chat icon. But as I say, they're white, so we can't see them actually on the page at the moment. But that's fine, because what we're actually going to go and do now is actually add all of the styles into the app. And we'll actually make a call to another function in our constructor. And we can just call a function called create styles, for example. And let's just head down and create that function now. So create styles. So the way we've added styling on previous videos is to actually put inline styles into the elements that we're creating. But what I'm actually going to do this time is, because there's quite a lot of styling to put in, I'm actually going to create a new element, which is going to be a style tag. And with this style tag, I'm just going to append it to the head of the page. So document.append child and that style tag. And then from there, what we can do with that added to the page, we can actually target the style tag and target its inner HTML, and then just assign it a huge string, which will have all of our CSS rules inside. So this is a bit of a dirty way of putting all these styles in, but it's also better than putting them all as inline styles to all of the elements. And overall, it will create a more cleaner markup that we can use, and it will save a lot of time adding all those inline styles to each of the elements that we're creating. So I'm going to zip through these styles reasonably quickly, because it's not the most important part of this particular project. But we're going to set up some classes for the icon, for example. And I'm going to set some width on it. Set its position to be absolute, if I can spell, and then set a few bits of positioning on it just to make sure it appears correctly in the circle that we're creating, and also put some transition on its transform properties. Okay, and then we use that class hidden a few times as well. So what I'm going to do for that is actually on its transform property, I'm just going to scale it to 0, so basically it's hidden. Then the next thing we had was the button container, which had the icons that we're creating. So let's set a background color, and I was using a sort of green color, but obviously you can feel free to change it to whatever you like. We're going to set a fixed width and height of this. So this will basically be the green circle that you can kind of see on the widget initially. And so to get that circle, we'll just set a border radius of 50%. Okay, so then we'll move on to the message container. So this holds the contact form. So we'll set a bit of box shadow on this, just to lift it off the page a little bit. 8 pixels, RGBA, and it will just be a sort of grayish black color. And we're going to set a fixed width of this, 400 pixels. And we're just going to move it right a little bit, because otherwise it'll be right at the edge of that page. and the bottom will be 75 pixels, and the max height is 400 pixels as well. So probably one thing to say here is the bottom and the right properties here should probably be calculated depending on the positioning that's set in by the developer. That's because this will throw the widget completely off, at least the message container, if we move the widget to the left or to the top. But just for this example, I'm just going to keep it as it is, just so we don't run out of time in the video. So the position of this is going to be absolute as well. And we're going to transition the max height property just for 0.2 seconds. So it just kind of floats in when the user opens the widget. And we'll also set a font family of Helvetica, Arial, or sans serif, whatever's available. So there was also a message container hidden property. We want to actually change the way that hidden container actually displays. And we don't want to do a transform like we do for the other elements. We want to set the max height of that equal to 0 pixels, and that creates that sort of fade in or float in effect when the user opens the widget. So message container, and there's going to be a H2 element in there. So we haven't created these yet, but we're going to do that in a second. Padding 20 pixels for both top and bottom and left and right. We'll set the color to white. And also the background color again is going to be the same green color that we were using for the actual widget button as well. Okay, so there's a bit more to do on the message container as well. So 1 second, message container. We're going to set, there's going to be a contact form inside of this. We're going to select all of the elements that are inside of that contact form and set some margin on them. And also we're going to specifically target inside that message container the input, so that will be the email address that the user is going to give to us. We'll set that as 10 pixels for the padding, and there is also going to be a text area in there too, which will be the area that they're giving us for their message. So we'll set a height on that, and also some padding too. And one other thing here as well to for the text area, we're just going to make sure that the font for the placeholder text actually has the right font. So font family, Helvetica, Arial, and sans serif. So nearly there, and we want to get the message container form button, and this is going to be the submit button inside of the form. So we'll say as pointer. The background color again is that green color, so OFB73F. Set the text color to white, the border to 0, and border radius to 4 pixels, and the padding to 10 pixels. Finally, the last one is for the hover state of the button. So when we're hovering over that button, just change the background color. And we'll change it to this color here, 32F. Okay, so if we save that, we've basically got this big, huge string that we're adding onto our style tag. And if we go back to the page, you can see we've got some of that being applied already. We're not getting the rounded border, so I wonder why that is. That should be on the button container. Maybe we've got a little misspelling here. Oh, no, I made a mistake. It should be a semicolon there. Let's put a colon instead. Yep, so there we've got our round icon appearing, but nothing else is happening at the moment. We can't click on that, and obviously the message container isn't being displayed. So before we actually work on the ability to open and close the widget, we need to create all of the actual elements inside of the message container. So this is going to be very similar to the initialization function where we created these elements here. So to create all of the content message container, like we left our little placeholder here, we're actually just going to call another function here called create message container content. And what we need to do is set up that function here. Oops, create message container content. So here we're going to create the actual contact form itself. So the first thing I'm going to do within that message container, I'm just going to strip out all of its inner HTML to start off with. just so it resets and we can create these elements from scratch. So we're going to first of all create a heading level 2 element. So create element and it's heading level 2. And the title.text content is going to be some message that the user is going to see. So we're not here. Drop us an email, I think I used initially. And that's just going to be the heading that's displayed to the user at the top of that message container. But now we're going to move on and create some more elements, in particular the form that the user is going to be submitting. And the form.classList.add content. Oops, so that was one of the classes we created just a moment ago. And then we're going to create a new element for the email. So we'll say document.createElement, and it's going to be an input element. And we're going to set some attributes on this email element as well. So we're going to say it's required. And we're going to say its ID is email. And finally as well, we're going to say the type of the input element is also email, just so we get a bit of validation built in with the browser for free. So let's set the placeholder of the email element as well to enter your email address. So that will be the input element that the user enters their email address into. So the next thing we need to do is the actual message text area that they enter their message in. So that will be a text area element that we're creating. And again, we're going to set that as required to true in the form. We'll set the ID of that equal to message. And we'll also put a placeholder in the text area too. Placeholder is your message. And that will be the text area where the user actually enters their message that's going to be sent to the company. So one other thing we need in here is the button that the user is going to click. So we'll create a new button element, and button.text content is equal to submit. And that will hook up an event listener for that in just a second. It'll actually be for the submitting of the form. But first of all, let's actually get all of those elements onto the form element themselves. So append child email onto the form. Same thing again for the message element, that's the text area. And then append child for the button. And as I say, let's set up an event listener as well. So add event listener. So when the user submits the form, so that'll be either where they click the button or if they hit enter. And we're going to create a new function in a moment called submit. So we'll just bind this property onto there so that we don't lose the context of all these different elements. So let's just stub that out for the moment. So there's our submit function that we just created. So just before we finish this message container function that is creating all of the different message container elements, on the message container, let's just append child the title, and also we're going to append child the form. So if you save that now, the elements will actually be there. You should be able to see them somewhere here. Yep, so we can see those elements we've just created, but obviously we haven't got an event listener to open that up or not. So that'll be our next job. So what we're actually going to do in our initialization function, which is somewhere here, that's the top of the function there. So down here, we're actually going to create a new event listener, and that will be on the actual button container itself. So I'm just going to add it in down here because this is where we're doing our stuff with the button container. So the button container is the actual green circle that has the icons inside it. So on the button container, let's add an event listener. And it's just going to be a click event listener. And we're going to bind that to a function called toggle open. Bind this so we don't lose our reference to all of the elements. So I haven't created that function either, so let's just put that down here. So toggle open. So this is just going to be a simple case of letting the class know that the widget is actually open, and we'll just do that by actually changing the property that we created all the way at the start of the constructor in the this.open. So we set it as false initially. So this lets the widget know that it's actually closed at the moment. So we'll just invert state of that open. So if it's closed it currently, it'll open it, and vice versa. And then we can just do a simple if statement. And say if this is open, so if the widget is actually open, what do we want to do? Well, for the chat icon, you see we saved the reference to that earlier on in the initialization function, so we can make use of it here. So this .chat icon, and the class list itself, we're going to add hidden, because when the widget is open, we actually want to hide that chat icon. And then for the close icon, we actually want to remove hidden, so that will display the close icon. And also for the message container as well, we actually want to display that so the user can actually fill out the form. So we'll remove hidden from there. And of course, an else state, so if it's not open, we actually want to call the create message container content again, and you'll see why we're rerunning this function just when we finish up in our last function call. But mainly what we want to do is set the chat icon visible again. So we want to remove from the class list hidden, and also the close icon, the class list of that, we actually want to add hidden. And finally, we want to make sure that the message container, the class list of that, we actually want to add hidden. So this toggle open function, first of all, it sets the state on the class, and then based on that state, we're either hiding or showing the various different icons and the message container itself. So fingers crossed, if we go back to the page, and if we just, let's close down the dev tools here. If we actually click the icon now, yep, we can see that we've got the message container appearing, and the icon has changed to the close icon instead of the chat icon. It looks like we've got some strange CSS styling here, so we'll have a look at that in a second. But the general principle of clicking on that is actually opening the message container and swapping out the icons. So let's just have a quick look at that CSS issue. So right where we've got our create styles function, let's open that back up. So it's going to be down here in the message container. I suspect I've made a typo somewhere along the lines. And actually looking at it, I think I actually missed out a complete class here for the content that we added. So let's add that in there. So message container.content. I remember adding the class in the JavaScript, but I didn't actually create the style to do that. So let's have some margin on this, a border, 1 pixel, solid, and a gray color. And a bit of padding, 10 pixels. And this was the main thing that made me think this wasn't here. The display should be set as flex. And we'll also set the background color as white. Finally, we'll just set the flex direction to column rather than a row. So if you save that, go back to the page and try clicking it again. That looks a little bit nicer. So now we've got this contact form appearing as it should do. So we've got a submit button, which will actually trigger the inbuilt validation in the browser, which is nice. We don't have to do anything with that. So let's just fill in some details. If we click test, you can see actually the form submits, but it's actually calling that submit function, which is doing nothing at the moment. So that's our final task really, is to just go and fill in the submit function so that when we click that button, we grab this information and then we can just log it out to the console. Okay, so where did we create that submit function? It was down here somewhere. So we're going to get an event passed to us from that function, from the event listener. So first thing we'll do is say prevent default, which will stop the page from reloading. And the form submission data, we're going to put that into a variable, which will basically be an object. And quite simply, we'll get the email, which is based off of the event. And from that event, we can access the source element. And that was going to be the form basically that the event has passed through. So using a query selector, we can get the email element via its ID and then just access its value. And then we'll get the message as well. So again, event source element, query selector, and we'll get the message. And then it will be the value of that too. So this is the data that will be sent to an API or to some kind of form handling service. But for the moment and for this tutorial, we're just going to log that out to the console so that we can see the information that the user has given to us. And then we just do one final thing in here, and this is a bit of a shortcut really, rather than creating a load more elements. In the message container, what we're going to do is set its inner HTML property to something along the lines of a heading level 2 tag, and just say, thanks for your submission. Someone will be in contact shortly. Oops. And just close the h2 tag off as well in the string there. So I'm just doing this for brevity really. What we should probably do is create a specific container that shows the thank you. But this is the reason why I was actually in the message container creation function. I was just setting the inner HTML to a blank string here, just so we start afresh from each time. And when we're actually toggling the open state of the widget, we're actually just going to recreate all of those elements inside there so that we don't get any duplicate or overlapping elements. So let's save that. And let's go back to the browser one more time. And so we've got our widget here. Let's click it to open it. And let's just fill it in an email address and put some text in for the message. So when we click submit this time, we've got thanks for your submission. Someone will be in contact shortly. And if we go down into the console, you can see we've got this object here, which is basically the email address that I typed in and also the message that was received. And if I actually close the widget now and reopen it again, you can see we get a fresh form ready to fill out again. And that's because we're resetting the inner HTML each time of this message container. So one final thing just before we finish the tutorial. So the whole point on our initial constructor of passing in the position here was to make it a bit more flexible. So let's say we've got bottom right here, but when the developer who's using this widget is actually putting it into their particular site, this is the code that they will be using. So they'll just basically be importing the class that we've just created and then just creating a new instance of it. And because it takes these options, what we can do is pass in the position as a property on the object here, and then just pass in bottom right. And you can see nothing changes because that's the value that we've got assigned to our widget at the moment. But potentially what we could do is change that to bottom left. What that should do is override the default. And now you can see the widget is appearing on the left-hand side. And if we open that up, you can see the styling's not quite right for it. And that's because we hard-coded the properties for the message container to be on the right-hand side. But a simple change and we could actually get that to appear on this side as well. So that's it for this tutorial. Hopefully you learned a few things about actually creating elements with JavaScript and how we don't need to rely on having HTML in an actual application itself. We can create all of that dynamically with the create element functions. And then we just added classes to those so that we can create some styles and just dump that into the head of whatever page the widget is running on. And that's a lot quicker than actually creating inline styles on each of those elements in turn. So go through the code in GitHub and feel free to ask me any questions if you get stuck with anything. And hopefully you can now have an understanding of how to create your own widgets and apply these techniques when doing so. So that's it for this tutorial. Don't forget to subscribe to support the channel and so you don't miss out on any future tutorials. I'll see you next time.